My whole childhood, I grew up in the city of Toronto. I'm a born and raised city rat, and I am totally accustomed and comfortable with the big city life. I lived in an apartment downtown. It was just me and my mum. She did such a great job of raising me and taking care of me. I always understood that being a single parent is hard. However, it was really tough for my mum. She had to get 2 jobs, and she even worked nights once a month or so. She was from a very small place in western Alberta called Fallston. It was a farm community with only about 100 residents total, and so to move all the way across the country to Toronto, Ontario was a huge step for her. I think the most common phrase I heard when I was younger was, "Oh, this is not how we used to do things in Fallston." She had to adjust to the city life quickly, and she had me when she was young, too. She was just 20 years old when I was born. It was an uphill battle, but I'm pretty good at being self-sufficient and doing my part. I would always ask my mom why we didn't live in Fallston anymore if she missed it so much, and it was always a dodgy subject. When I was a teenager, I was determined to hear about her hometown, and I guess she decided I was old enough to hear her story. One morning, after she had a night shift, I asked her again. That's when she told me about her life in Fallston and why she didn't want me to grow up there. The following is in her words, about the monster of Fallston, Alberta. Fallston was a really small place. Families were a bit big because everybody had a farm and you needed the bodies around the house to take care of the land. I couldn't tell you how many people lived there, but there were about 25 to 30 farms spread out over Fallston, so probably over 100 people total. The road didn't lead to the bottom of the horseshoe of Fallston. Sorry, I should clarify. The horseshoe is what the road was called, shaped like a big horseshoe if you looked at it from a map or from above it. The road into the town connected to the bottom middle of the horseshoe, with the 2 ends atop it leading to the Fallston thicket. The thicket was a really large forested area full of wildlife and overgrowth. The farms lined either side of the road as it curved either side, with our main town hall at the bottom of the horseshoe. Anyways, from the time I was born, it was common knowledge that when it started getting dark on the night of a full moon, you were to ensure that all the animals were locked away in the barn. If something was left outside, it wouldn't be alive in the morning. I had never seen it when I was younger, but you know how gossip goes. From what I gathered, the monster looked like a man, because it could walk on 2 legs, but it would run on all 4s and it was covered in dark, thick fur. I knew it was big, and it had a face like a wolf, big mouth, teeth, and angry animal eyes. That was what Dave Sanders told us, at least. He said his dad chased the monster of the property and that he had seen the monster, but my dad told me that the Sanders had lost a lot of animals that year, so I'm not sure if Dave was telling us the truth when he said his dad chased it away successfully. Anyway, we kept to ourselves. It was a practice in discipline. If you forgot to do your diligence and take care of your animals, you'd pay the price for it. Full moons come once a month, and you just have to deal with it when it comes. We were fine with that. But Philip was a different story. I was seeing your father at the time. Mark and I had been together for a couple years, and I was definitely in love. His best friend was Philip Grant, and my best friend was Emily Smithers. Just by being around us so much, Philip and Emily eventually started going out too. So the 4 of us spent a lot of time with each other when we didn't have to help out around our land. There was an incident, however. It happened in the spring. I think it was May, but it could have been April. I don't know the circumstances, other than that Philip was supposed to close up the barn in preparation for the monster and he didn't. The times when the monster would strike, it would be because a lone animal got left out, or a couple escaped. Generally, our town was pretty diligent at ensuring we didn't give the monster anything to take from us. But Philip just screwed up. The morning after a full moon, Simon Grant went to open up the barn but found it open. Their whole barn looked like a slaughterhouse. Everything was completely devoured, save for some bones and some blood. The whole town pitched in to help out the Grants, and they got some more animals, but it was a huge hit to their family. Philip was severely punished by his father, so the gossip went. From that day onward, Philip made it his goal to kill the monster of Fallston. It was all he talked about. He started drawing, plotting and planning, trying to convince Mark to come out and help him. I was obviously opposed. This went on for months. I think part of it was to outlet the frustration from whatever his dad did to him, because he was a totally different person after that incident. Emily was very supportive of him, despite worrying for his well-being. I don't blame her. It would have been nice to not have the monster to worry about. Philip's obsession culminated in June, but it didn't seem that way at first. He hadn't spoken a breath about the monster in almost a week. Mark, Emily and I silently hoped it was because he had moved on. It was a Saturday and it was a rare occasion when we were all free at night. There was a big community event going on in town hall at the bottom of the horseshoe. Mark, Emily, Philip and I made plans to hang out at Philip's house, but last minute, Mark told me he wasn't going to be able to make it, so I went over with Emily. It was a full moon, however, so all of our families made sure that we were to be indoors before sunset. When we got there, we hung out in his living room, which faced the fields behind the Grant household. Philip was acting like himself for a little while, but he started getting fidgety as it got darker out. I couldn't tell if Emily noticed, but I had a bad feeling build up inside me. That was when I brought it up. I remember saying to him, "Philip, what's going on? Why do you keep looking outside?" I looked out over his shoulder and noticed something. One of the Wells family's chickens that they had given to Philip's family was outside. The barn was locked up. Then, I noticed the rifle leaning by the back door. He was trying to lure the monster. I remember I pleaded with him to not do this, and that it was too dangerous. Emily looked shocked and quickly grew frightened. "Philip, it's a bad idea. I'm not going to let you do this. Don't tell me what to do. This is for the best. Think of all the good a single, well-placed bullet can do." I begged him not to do something stupid and wished Mark was with me to stop him. Emily sat silently, too afraid to defend him, but too loyal to say something. As he explained his reasoning to us, a horrible sound from outside sprung Philip into action. I looked out the window and I felt my heart in my throat. The chicken frantically ran around and made horrible sounds as I saw the monster come closer to the pen, becoming further illuminated by the porch light the closer it got. It was covered in thick, grey fur and had a head like a wolf or some sort of hunting dog, long, pointed ears, a dog-like snout riddled with large fangs and piercing yellow eyes. It was incredibly humanoid in its appearance and was covered in muscle. It was on all fours, but it was definitely at least 7 feet tall standing. It stalked close to the chicken like a large jungle cat, which was almost funny. A beast that big looked like it could swallow the small bird whole. It wasn't funny, though, because the Grant's living room window was the only thing between the monster and Emily and I. I watched in fascination as it broke its hunting ritual and savagely pounced on the chicken, devouring it in seconds. Then, I heard it. A gunshot rang out. The monster's ear perked up as it took an aggressive stance, as it began to stand on its hind legs. Seeing Philip with the gun frantically reloading after he missed his first shot, I thought I was about to watch my friend die. However, it did something unexpected. It turned and sprinted away on all fours. I heard Philip yell in anger as he finished reloading and sprinted after the monster. I wish I could say I ran after him and stopped him, but I didn't. Emily and I sat in the silence for a few moments before she broke and started to cry. Moments later, we heard another distant gunshot, and our eyes shot to the window. Outside of the small illuminated area from the porch light, we saw nothing but darkness. Somehow, we fell asleep on the couch. When I woke up, it was bright outside. Emily was still asleep, and as I looked around, I audibly gasped when I saw Philip sitting at the kitchen table. He looked shell-shocked and very upset. A million things went through my mind. Was he hurt? When did he get home? Where did he go? But instinctively, the first thing I asked him was, "Did you kill it?" Without looking up to meet my gaze, he shook his head. "No. I cornered it near the thicket. The thing was on its hind legs, I guess trying to intimidate me. But it didn't attack. It just looked at me, and I shot him point blank, right in the chest." Philip stood up, meeting my gaze as he walked over, and crumpling up a newspaper page as he did. He tossed it at me and I failed to react, the paper ball harmlessly bouncing off my forehead. "I might as well have done that," he continued. "I got so spooked, I just froze up and waited to die. But it just ran past me, off into the thicket," he finished. I shook my head in shock. "I think it's going to get a lot worse around Fallston before it gets better," Philip said as he looked at me with sad eyes, glancing down at the still sleeping Emily. After a moment of silence, he cleared his throat and spoke again. "I think you should go. Don't tell anybody about this," I nodded as I got up to leave. As I opened his front door, Philip spoke again. "It speaks, you know." I left. Philip's words rang true over the next year. It was getting a whole lot worse in Fallston. Every moon cycle, the incidents with the monster increased. It started lurking around farms. It somehow would break into barns, and it was being seen all over Fallston. It's a very big area because farms take up a huge amount of space, and the distance between homes is very large, so the fact that it was being sighted in multiple areas of the region in a single night was alarming. It was big, strong, and fast, and using all of its attributes. The town was getting worried. On top of the issues everybody was having with the supernatural, the friend group was suffering. Philip started resenting Mark, which was horrifying to me to see two best friends fall out. Philip was angry. He would say that if Mark had been with us the night in June, it would have gone differently. Mark was tired of Philip's obsession with the monster and wanted Philip to realize that his actions were irrational and dangerous. The two stopped wanting to be around each other. When they were, it would be a time filled with animosity and in the air and vitriol in their words. Almost a full year since the incident with Philip, in the spring, the word spread that there was to be a town meeting at the bottom of the horseshoe. My family took me down with them, and I saw that Mark, Emily, and Philip were there already with their families. The families began discussing the ramifications of allowing the monster to continue wreaking havoc in Fallston. They discussed how the houses were being stalked now. It was clear the monster was beginning to want for the taste of human flesh. I remember Simon Grant piped in and made the conclusion that the monster was getting hungrier. It would stop setting for farm animals sooner rather than later. Eventually, it was decided, the monster had to die. I felt uneasy, remembering how Philip failed to rid our world of it almost a year ago. What hope would we have? As my uneasiness grew and I yearned to speak my thoughts about the futility of trying to kill the monster, Philip spoke up from the back of the crowd, and people parted to see the young man speaking. "We'll kill it. Me and Mark. The full moon comes in a week. We all know it has to live in the thicket. So we'll go in. We'll find it and kill it." To my horror, everybody agreed with the idea, and it was settled. Philip and Mark were going to go into the Fallston thicket and kill the monster. When the day came, I was nervous. I knew something was afoot, and it was going to end badly in some way. I was with Mark at my house in the hours of the late afternoon leading up to sunset as Mark packed his gun and knives and donned thick clothes. My fears grew when he looked up at me and sighed. He wanted to say something but he was holding it back. "What is it?" "Philip. He's going to try to kill me tonight." "What are you talking about?" I felt a shiver throughout my body as fear began to overcome me at hearing his words. "He hasn't talked to me in months, and the last time we did was hardly friendly. Then, he volunteers the both of us to go into the thicket after dark. He blames me for his experience the night he tried to be a hero, and he's been blaming himself watching the monster terrorize Fallston. He's going to rationalize his fears. He's going to try to kill me. Don't go. Let's talk to him, sit him down, just figure this out." "No, Sarah. We have to be there tonight. Whatever is going to happen is going to happen." Mark spoke with a voice completely void of remorse or emotion. He looked at me with an empty, resigned stare as he finished packing his guns, and left without saying goodbye. I immediately called Emily. We were on our way to the thicket before I knew it. Emily had her dad's gun. The plan was to show the guys that we wouldn't let them solve their problems with a medieval-aged solution. The thicket had a path that went through the west end all the way through to the east end, but it was massive and there were lots of woods surrounding the meager pathway. We entered through the west pathway as the sun was creeping down over the horizon. The sky was a vibrant purple as we entered, but the thick canopy of trees and brush limited vision of anything outside the thicket. Emily looked purely horrified, jumping at every chipmunk that stirred or bird that moved. I watched the pistol shake in her hands as they held it with white knuckles. I hoped for her sake she wouldn't have to hold it up or use it. The fear was evident, and even having the gun wasn't helping. I didn't blame her. This was where the monster made its home. I was just more worried about Mark and Philip. After minutes of walking, we heard the shouting. We picked up our pace from a fast walk to a jog and cut off the trail to follow the sounds. Soon enough, we were met with a large slope down to a slight clearing in the thicket, where Mark stood in a defenseless stance, Philip holding his rifle only 10 feet in front of Mark. They didn't see us. My heartbeat quickened to a race as I realized the gravity of the situation, and I almost prayed for the monster to show itself. "Shut up, Mark. Fuck you. You wouldn't be in this mess if you hadn't laid a stupid fucking trap. Why couldn't you just leave it alone? Shut up, Mark. No. You had to be the hero because you originally fucked up by leaving the barn open? Don't you see how everything you do makes things worse? Why do you think this will change that trend?" Philip lowered his voice. "You aren't going to change my mind. You're running out of time, Phil." Mark sounded too confident for a man seconds from death. Philip tightened up his stance and held the gun higher, taking a step forward. As he did, Emily screamed and snapped me out of the trance the situation had put me in. As she did, Philip was startled, and fired the gun. but missed. Mark immediately looked over and shot us an angry look, and just as quickly, ran at Philip and tackled him. Somehow, Philip got to his feet and ran as Mark chased him through the woods. Emily and I quickly descended the hill, but Emily did so much faster as she ran in the direction that Mark and Philip went. We weaved in and out of trees and thick brush, which was getting harder and harder by the second. The little light from the sunset that crept into the thicket was gone, as the moon began to replace the sun in the sky, and darkness replaced the light. As I rounded the last bend, panting and breathless, I saw Emily had stopped in her tracks. I rested behind her as I followed her gaze. I didn't see Mark anywhere. Philip was hunched over on the ground, but he wasn't Philip. Even from the distance, I heard the horrible sounds of bones creaking and shifting as I looked at the horrible combination of man and beast crumpled on the ground in front of me like a contortionist. Silver hair covered his arms and face and thickened by the second. His head was contorted and disgusting as it changed shape and form in front of my eyes. His horrifying screams of agony as his human body distorted and warped slowly became growls and snarls. Before I knew it, I watched the color drain from its eyes, and I felt the humanity drain from its body. It rose, uncurling himself of the ground and rising to 2 legs. This was smaller than the monster I had seen Philip encounter the first night. The fur was lighter, the eyes less yellow. Even still, it was horrible and magnificent all at once. It looked at us, at Emily holding the gun with shaking grasp in front of her, and I watched its chest rise and fall once before opening its mouth. The words were choked out, every syllable an effort to get out. I heard the strained and yet very clear voice of something not human, something that was not natural. "I'm sorry." Emily used a free hand to cover her mouth as she squinted her eyes, holding back tears while she held the gun shakily in her other. Slowly, I saw something moving closer to us from over the shoulder of the new beast. In what seemed like an instant, the original monster had sprung from the brush like a predatory jungle cat, and sunk its claws into the thing we had seen Philip turn into. The monster was bigger, faster, stronger, and had the element of surprise. It was no contest. I watched it lean forward and bite into the other's throat, and with that, I watched Philip Grant die as a beast. Emily dropped the gun, hyperventilating as she cried at the scene. She was unable to contain herself. The noise of the gun hitting the forest floor was the first sound made by either of us following the monster's horrific battle. The second the steel barrel touched the brush at Emily's feet, the monster's gaze shot up to meet Emily's. I made a bad decision. Maybe it was good for me at the time, but I feel bad about it to this day. I lived. I got out of the thicket. I left Emily Phillips behind. She was devoured. It was the last I ever saw of her. Your dad told me the next day that when he had run after Philip, he realized it hadn't been worth it and doubled back to find us, but couldn't. I actually ran into him when I escaped the thicket, and he embraced me happy to know I was okay. We left the thicket together as your dad consoled me following the trauma. The next little while was a rush. A lot happened very quickly in Fallston. Mark and I told the people that the monster had killed Philip and Emily and that we had escaped. We did not tell them that Philip had become a monster himself. I was filled with regret about the events of the evening. Emily had been my best friend. I felt responsible. The town was not going to let the monster continue to run rampant after 2 people had lost their lives. However, I heard from my dad that at the next full moon, the townspeople were going to burn down the thicket, and hopefully trap the monster in the blaze. I also found out that I was pregnant. I didn't want a child to be born in Fallston. it wouldn't have been a good life. I wouldn't have been able to live with myself knowing that I was in a town where my two best friends had died. Where the townsfolk burned down the thicket to kill a supernatural monster that had terrorized us. Secretly, I was mostly afraid that when they tried to burn down the thicket, it would fail and the monster would wreak havoc. I left 2 days before the next full moon cycle. I told your dad to come with me, but he had become very sick. I didn't know the specifics. It had something to do with bad meat. He told me he would come with me when he got better. I ended up in Toronto. I waited. Unfortunately, he was too sick. He never got better. I had said my final goodbye to your dad when I left Fallston. I had heard as well that the plan had worked. The townspeople found the monster's burnt body near the entrance to the eastern end of the thicket shortly after the blaze had died down. Fallston was finally free from the monster. When my mum had finished telling me the story, I was horrified but fascinated. However, any questions I asked would be dismissed. I never got straight answers out of her. I never got to meet or even talk to her parents or my dad's parents. I've asked a few times to visit Fallston, and I've been told that we are never going to go back there. That the memories are too much for her to handle. Recently, I asked her one last question about Fallston. About her story. She was sitting in the living room, unwinding after her day with a glass of wine. Mum? Yes, sweetie? Your story about Fallston? Sam, not tonight. It's just one question. About when you were in the thicket. She let out a long sigh and hesitantly agreed to let me ask my question. When the monster looked up at you and Emily. How did you get away? What do you mean? It was bigger, stronger, and faster than anything human could be. You were deep in the woods. You said Emily got devoured. How did you escape? She looked at me and took a breath. I told you. I ran. I don't know. I never looked back. That's why I feel bad. I took in her response, and let the subject drop. I'm going to start paying attention to the specifics of the days when my mum tells me she is going to be working a night shift,